Welcome to CRJ34, Intro to Juvenile Justice, and this week we're discussing Chapter 3, which looks at individual views of delinquency. And so really the first question you have to ask ourselves really is, why do kids commit delinquency or become involved in crime? And so really what the chapter does is explore several different explanations for that. And the first of these is rational choice theory, which is really one of the first formal explanations of crime and delinquency, and it really held that human behavior was a matter of choice and that people had free will to choose what they did. Now, one of the first schools of thought to explore crime that way was the classical school of thought, or classical criminology, and it believed that the decision to commit crime followed a cost-benefit analysis. In other words, people engage in this deciding the cost of crime, the consequences, the punishment, were they greater or less than the possible benefits or reward to committing the crime. If they felt the consequence was less than the potential reward, then they may choose to commit crime. Now, there are many different factors that shape that decision to commit crime. Personal choices, parental controls, certain changes in life, and other things that contribute to that. Now, another aspect of rational choice theory is what we call routine activities theory, which really held that crime was influenced by really the interaction of three different variables. One of those being the lack of a capable guardian or someone to watch over or protect people or property. And then the second of those is suitable targets. In other words, if you had something that was appealing, people wanted, that could create a suitable target. And then finally, motivated offenders. You had to have someone who had made that decision to commit crime. And when those three existed together, that's when crime is likely. Now, an important concept of controlling delinquency is what we call deterrence. Now, general deterrence holds that the choice to commit crime is really kind of structured by the threat of punishment that we see in the laws, what we see happen to other people. Now, one of the guiding principles in that is that the more severe and the more certain and swift the punishment, the greater its deterrent effect. And probably out of those three things, severeness is probably the least important. The more certain and swift the punishment is, even if it's relatively minor in its severity, can have a deterrent effect. Now, specific deterrence holds that if a specific offender is punished severely, then that experience should convince them to discontinue committing crime. Now, the chapter also looks at situational crime prevention, which really are strategies aimed at reducing opportunities that people have to commit crime. And really it ties in a lot with what we talked about with routine activities theory. Now, the second part of this chapter looks at biosocial and psychological views of delinquency. Now, early views really held that delinquent behavior was a function of maybe a single factor or trait, such as body type or defective intelligence. So biosocial theorists believe that there's an interaction between this predisposition or trait and the environment that one lives in that can produce delinquency. So in other words, biological traits and one's environment work together to contribute to delinquency or crime. Now, some theorists also believe that criminal or antisocial behavior or tendencies can be inherited from parents. So when you think about connecting delinquent behavior to heredity, it can be quite controversial. Well, why is that? Well, because it really implies that the cause of delinquency is present at birth and then it's transmitted from one generation to the next. What do you think? Now, when we look at psychological theories of delinquency, we have to realize that although Freud didn't really discuss delinquency per se, he did believe that law violations were a product of an abnormal personality structure. What do you think? Do you agree with that? How might you explain certain types of crime that most of us feel someone, quote-unquote, normal wouldn't commit? Now, social learning theory believes that a person's learning and their social experiences, coupled with their different values and expectations, can determine their behavior. So another way to look at that is that social learning believes that children model their behavior after other people. In fact, the authors go so far as to say that some children model their behavior after TV and movie characters. Do you agree that some children model their behavior after those characters? Do you think that viewing violence in the media can make a child more violent? Something to consider. Now, really, this as we look at this chapter and we look at the closing of it, it really at the end presents an overview of cognitive theory, antisocial personality, how intelligence and delinquency are linked, the nature versus nurture debate, and then it talks about critiques of each of those. So really what I do is encourage you to think about, which arguments that you find to be most persuasive and why. And then if there's a particular topic that you find interesting, dig further and find out more about it. Next week we'll take a look at Chapter 4, which examines social structure, process, culture, and delinquency.